Matt, you've been a big promoter of open source here at Elemica.
Yes.
In layman's terms, right? I hear the term all the time.
Yeah.
But in its most basic format, what is open source and why is it important in the engineering world and our product development?
So open source is this concept that, let's say that you write me something that may be useful for my business. You have a number of options in terms of how you can give that to me, right? You could just sell it to me as something that I can't change, right? That's the typical proprietary approach.
Okay.
You just hand me something that, like this finished thing that my computer will run, but that I don't have any idea how you got to that. The open source approach is a bit different. It's the idea of releasing a tool or an application alongside the original code that actually creates that when you run it through a compiler on a computer, or whatever other tool is applicable for that specific language. And it essentially is distributed alongside a license that basically gives me the ability as an engineer to examine your code, to change it, to suggest changes and then contribute them back to you, and to really participate in the development of whatever it is you've built. And that's important because it promotes a level of collaboration amongst the engineering community that would be really hard to achieve otherwise. Because everybody can kind of come to the table and we kind of have this agreement in the form of the license that's in place and in the form of kind of etiquette that's pretty common knowledge of we can come to the table and have this ability to work on this thing together, regardless of what organization we're working for or what goals we may have for that particular tool, and we can contribute to make it better. So by using an open source product, the product itself actually gets exposed to more viewpoints and gets more input than it would if it were a single company or a single person.
What has driven this shift in thinking, really, from that proprietary, this is mine, if you want it, you have to buy it, through to what you just described, which is this highly collaborative, there's a codependency or a we're in it together sort of approach. What's driven that change?
This idea of collaboration amongst the industry is not new to technology itself. We have standards boards that regularly meet that decide on changes to communication standards across platforms and things like that. And open source software has been around in some form for years. It's really kind of lately that we've seen large industry catching on to this existing trend of collaboration. We just recently saw that Microsoft open sourced a substantial portion of their .NET platform on GitHub for basically everyone to look at, and within a week they had the first community contribution to make some sort of change to the framework.
Why is that important here at Elemica specifically? In our space, in our supply chain operating network world. When you look at our capabilities today, what key components have been born out of what you just described?
The biggest and most visible example is the new QuickLink portal that we've built out. The QuickLink portal is built using the Lift web framework, which is an open source package. I think it's about 7 years old at this point. It was originally started by David Pollock, and it was one of the first web frameworks that existed for the programming language that we're using here at Elemica. Over that time, it's evolved into an incredibly stable and incredibly secure package over the course of the 7 years. If we were to try and recreate that in-house, we would be so stifled by the mountain of work that we had ahead of us that it would be impossible to innovate on what we actually want to innovate on, which is the supply chain networks that are actually going to change the way that people are interacting with their supply chains. And in many ways, that's true across different parts of the system as a whole. our leveraging of open source software really allows us to innovate at a much faster clip than an organization that was trying to do everything in-house.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, some clear wins would be the velocity at which you could bring products to the market or solutions to the market. In addition to that, then not only are you getting solutions to the market faster, but you're doing so with much higher quality.
Yes, and in addition to that, as I mentioned before, when you open source something, it's going to get exposed to a lot more viewpoints, a lot more people poking and prodding it to see if they can make it break. And on the whole, you're going to get something that's a lot more reliable by having access to and participating in this open source community. I have a much wider toolkit than I would have if I was just working for the language. That gives me a lot more exposure to different design patterns that people have used to solve similar problems. It gives me a lot more exposure to the collective knowledge of the community, right? Leveraging that, I can come to solutions that are probably a bit more creative. There's a little bit of a creative leap that you can make if you're continually involved in those conversations and thinking a little bit outside of the box of your day-to-day world.